Thanks for being here. My name is Lauren Williams. I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. Today's update from the 100% Renewable Energy by 2030 Coalition is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. And now I'd like to welcome our moderator, League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County President, Barbara Hoppe. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Lauren, and thank you to the Columbia Public Library for co-hosting our monthly Lunch and Learn programs. Today, you will hear from 3 local climate action leaders, Carolyn Amperin, Mark Hyam, and Erica Escani. And they are calling for the City of Columbia to commit to attaining 100% of electricity from renewable energy by 2030. Carolyn Amperin serves as the chair of the Columbia Climate and Energy Commission, as well as chair of the Sierra Club Osage Group. I think they're renaming their name, I heard. Yeah. She has been engaged in climate change education and solutions for about 9 years. Her professional background is in information technology, marketing, and business development. Mark Hyam serves as director of the Mid-Missouri Peaceworks. He's lived in Columbia since about 1971 and has been an activist and community educator around energy, sustainability, and climate issues for more than 40 years. And finally, our third speaker today is Erica Escani, who works part-time for the Mid-Missouri Peaceworks as their climate education coordinator, teaching classes on climate change and sustainability. She is also a member of the Columbia's Climate Environment Commission and just a climate reality leader. But before you hear from our speakers, I wanted to mention that the League of Women Voters has approved and signed a letter to the City Council supporting 100% renewable energy by 2030. And in fact, the League of Women Voters, just sort of some old history, not too old, was instrumental in getting the first renewable energy ordinance adopted in Columbia in 2004. And then when I was on council in January of 2014, I, with help from the league and other organizations, was able to increase that goal to 30%, which is better, but not good enough. So with that, I turn the program over to our 3 speakers. Carolyn.
Thank you very much, Barbara, and certainly appreciate your past leadership in this area. So that's outstanding that you and the league have been able to be so instrumental. Okay, so we'll jump right into this today to make sure that we get time for everyone's questions at the end. So our topic today, as Barbara said, is 100% renewable energy by 2030. So I'm going to just go here into the agenda. Oops. All right, my slide's advancing. I'm going to stop sharing just for a moment and restart again because something was not working right there. Okay, there we go. All right, so the agenda for today is just to talk specifically about what we mean by this goal, what it includes, what it doesn't, why we need to achieve this goal by 2030, why we believe it's possible to do this and how Columbia can do it, some of the common questions that come up when talking about this initiative, how you can help. Then we'll have some comments from our other panelists and then open question and answer at the end. So to be specific about what the goal is, we would like the Columbia City Council to commit to 100% clean renewable energy for electricity from Columbia Water and Light by 2030. So this is just specific to the energy from Columbia Water and Light. It does not address like the emissions for Columbia as a whole, or even the emissions from the entire city government. Some of the current goals that we have today, Barbara just mentioned the current renewable energy ordinance that we have, where the goal is currently 30% by 2029. We also have the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan that was approved in 2019 that sets a goal for municipal operations to reduce their emissions 50% by 2035 and 100% by 2050. And Columbia Water and Light would be considered a part of municipal operations. Additionally, the Climate Action Plan has a specific action item which recommends that we get this 100% electricity from renewable energy by 2035 instead of 2030. But this is something that the scientific data has changed since that action item was written. And based upon the scientific data about the status of global warming and the status of global emissions, the Climate and Environment Commission has already made a recommendation to change that target to 2030. I also want to note that having served both on the task force to create the Climate Action Plan and now on the commission, that from the data, it's clear that it's really impossible to meet our municipal goals without aggressive action to convert the Columbia Water and Light energy production to renewable energy. So why do we specifically need this goal and need it with it being in 2030? Well, one of the most urgent reasons is to solve the climate crisis. Scientists around the world agree that global warming must be kept below 1.5 degrees Celsius to really prevent, even terrible disastrous impacts more than we're seeing today. Unfortunately, the world has already warmed 1 degree, so we really do not have much time left to make this transition. The United States has historically been the largest producer of greenhouse gas emissions, and we're still the second largest producer in the world. We recently made a commitment as part of the UN Conference of the Parties to reduce emissions in the United States 50 to 52% by 2030. So Columbia really needs to do our part to participate in this process. And because electricity is the biggest category of our local emissions, it needs to be a big participant in this process. Electricity emissions represented 42% of our emissions in 2019, and that remains fairly consistent. Another point to really think about is disaster cost avoidance. In last year alone, extreme weather, much of it caused and precipitated by climate change, has cost the United States more than $100 billion. So we need to really think about, by investing in renewable energy now, we're helping to avoid cost in the future from possible future disasters. So there are also a lot of other co-benefits besides solving the climate crisis to moving towards renewable energy. These benefits can benefit our local economy. Today, most of the dollars, or all of the dollars really, for coal and natural gas fuels flow to other states. And we invest in renewable energy, we can keep those dollars in state or even locally in county with solar farms. Local renewable energy through solar installations, whether it be from the city, a commercial solar farm, or us putting it on our own homes and businesses, create good paying local jobs. Additionally, it offers a competitive advantage for business. Many businesses have committed to clean renewable energy for their operations, and they'll locate where that renewable energy is available and make expansion investments as well. So over 290 global companies have already made a commitment to go to 100% renewable energy. So when they're considering, where they're going to make investments, they're going to take whether renewable energy is available into their decision process. Some additional benefits include less air pollution by not having coal-fired power plants or natural gas plants, less water utilized for energy production, and water is forecast to be a resource that's constrained in the future, lower cost to consumer over time once those initial investments are recouped, less reliance on energy sources outside the United States. We wouldn't have to worry anymore about the price of oil or who's producing what oil. And of course, there's an endless supply of sun and wind, unlike a limited resource of natural gas and coal in the ground. So how can Columbia achieve this goal? Well, first off, I need to tell you about what the Integrated Electric Resource and Master Plan is. This is a plan that was recently completed in Columbia, and it took 3 years in the making. And Columbia hired a consultant called Siemens to help with this process. And basically, we do this every 5 years to make sure that we have a solid plan. Every utility does this to make sure they have a solid plan to meet forecasted electrical demand, both on an everyday basis, every hour of the day, as well as any forecasted peaks. And then in addition to forecasting peak demand, the rules require that you also are able to meet a peak higher than the peak that you've ever had in the past. So there's an established reserve margin. The plan uses a combination of supply side and demand side resources. And supply side means all the sources of energy like solar farms and wind farms and coal-fired power plants. And demand side means those programs where we are making our homes more energy efficient. We are trying to not use our appliances that are optional during peak hours, which is like 4 to 6 in the summer. So that's demand side. And then of course, a plan covers a specified period of time. So in Columbia, we have we already have plans in place. Columbia Water and Light does, and you can read about this in their most recent renewable energy report, to achieve 44% renewables by 2025. So we're already almost close to halfway to this goal, but we need to do better. And the latest Integrated Electric and Resource and Master Plan, we call it the IERMP for short, tells us how we can do that. And so we've been waiting 3 years now for this plan, ever since the cap was passed, to really understand, is this goal feasible and affordable? And according to the work that Siemens has done, it is. So I'll take you through a little bit more detail on this, but try not to get too wonky. So the plan includes 8 future scenarios. And each of those scenarios has 17 different variables in it that were all plugged into a computer model to simulate the future demand that we would have on our electrical system, what the peak would be, when we would need to add more capacity. And a lot of those variables include things like how much electric vehicles we'll have, what will the price of electricity be in the future from various sources. So all those things get plugged in to the model. So on this slide, I wanted to highlight that some of these models are in the control, or some of these variables, excuse me, are in the control of City Council, and some of them are things that are outside of our control, like what regulations come out of the federal government. We want to focus on particularly a few of these cases: the reference case, the early utility renewable, and the early utility renewable with highest CO2 price, and look specifically at this goal, which the City Council can control, which is when do we achieve 100% renewable energy for electricity? So 3 cases that we want to look at are 2050, 2030, and 2040. And you can see that there's a lot of different factors here that are, some are, set at different variables to come up with all these different scenarios for planning for the city utility. So I want to just cover a little bit more detail about the early renewable scenario, because that's the one that we're advocating for. So again, we would have 100% renewable energy electricity by translates into 0 carbon emissions for electricity by 2030. And then if you compare this to the reference case, which would achieve 100% by 2050, the scenario included a higher penetration of customer-owned solar, twice as much energy efficiency savings, meaning we're all trying to be more efficient with our usage and with our homes, higher electric vehicle demand, and overall, all of this combined resulted in a scenario that had 10.7% lower electricity demand by 2040 than the reference case. So how would we get here? So according to Siemens model, and their model includes all kinds of different choices for energy sources and how much those energy sources are going to cost, the model indicates that we would need to add both wind and solar energy to make the 2030 goal. Solar in yellow, wind in green. We would also potentially use battery storage in the future, as well in 2039. I wanted to note here is there's a footnote on the bottom, because in the fine print of the plan, if you read it, they also recommend keeping the Columbia Energy Center available for backup for any peak demand at night during this initial conversion to energy. And they anticipate that at most that would be 1 to 4% of total generation during this time period. We can also look at what would this impact be if we made this transition on emissions, especially looking at those kind of capacity additions that we saw on the last slide. So the blue is 2030, the red is 2040, and the green is the 2050 reference case. So you can see that right away emissions start dropping as we increase our renewable energy percentage in the electricity mix. It's significantly lower by 2024 and gone at the end of 2030 when we've made this transition. But you also see that if we wait until 2050, emissions are still significantly higher throughout this time period. So an important factor that we all want to consider as customers is what's the impact on rates. So it's important for us to realize that the impact on rates is only going to be on half of the total cost that the utility has. So the cost of the actual electricity is about half of the total utility cost. The Siemens reports estimates that in terms of today's dollars, that it would cost about $50 million extra for electricity spread over 20 years to go with the 2030 scenario. So just to make the math simple, you can think of that as about $2.38 million a year increase, which is not a lot in the big scheme of the utility budget. Another thing that impacts the rates is the timing of when the investments are required. And so that's what we saw on the graph that showed when we might need to add wind and solar. Another point that I wanted to make is that in order to add wind and solar 4 or 5 years from now, we have to start planning that today, because that's how long it takes to get a new wind farm or new solar farm under contract, built, and in production. So this is something that we can't put off. We have to start thinking about it now. Today, the Renewable Energy Ordinance includes a 3% cap on the rate impact for how much we can spend additional on renewable energy over fossil fuel energy. Now, this is becoming less of an issue over time as the cost for renewable energy continues to drop and new contracts are even less expensive than the ones we made a few years ago. But we feel like it's important potentially to still keep this 3% rate cap in place, maybe make it inflation adjusted, but we need consumers to feel comfortable that this conversion isn't going to drive their electricity bills through the roof. And just for an example, on the usage part of your electric bill, if we actually reach the full 3% increase, that it would only be $3 on $100 usage part of the bill. That's not even the whole bill. That's just the electric usage part. And the other thing to note is it's not automatic. Just because the renewable energy costs more that year, it doesn't mean that it's automatically going to raise rates. The utility has to come forward to the City Council with their rate request and demonstrate across all of their costs why they need a rate increase. So I wanted to share with you, I mentioned that the cost of renewable energy have been coming down. So on this graph, we can see the levelized cost of energy in the United States. And levelized cost just means a way to compare all the different sources of energy equally across the board. So you can see coal and natural gas have been relatively stable, although in the past year, natural gas has gone up. Nuclear, the costs have actually increased, and that's primarily due to the expensiveness of creating a nuclear power plant and dealing with the waste. Wind energy has come down significantly in price, and solar has come down even more dramatically. And we anticipate that those costs are going to remain stable or continue to drop. So what are some of the common questions that come up when we're thinking about making this energy transformation? The first one is renewable energy really reliable enough to be able to achieve this 100% goal and have 24/7 operations? And the answer is yes. And the reason we can say that is because a lot of cities and countries, entire countries around the world, are much further along in this process than we are. And engineers have discovered that with properly designing the system and designing all the sources and inputs, that you can achieve a reliable electrical system with 100% renewable energy. Reliability, it's important to know, is a function not just of the energy sources, but of the entire system, which includes the transmission lines as well as the sources of energy. And this is usually referred to as the grid in general. So the grid can be designed to include a diverse set of these resources. And then the other point that you have to design for is to make sure that you can meet demand, and even a greater peak demand than you've ever had in the past. And so that's just a matter of engineering in enough resources around the country to be able to call on at the time of need. For example, Germany already gets, and this is the entire country, already gets half of their country's electricity from renewable, and they have one of the most reliable grids in the world. Another factor that makes this possible is that weather forecasting is much more accurate now than it used to be. And we can predict, when the sun is going to shine and when wind speeds are what they're going to be at a particular wind farm much more accurately than in the past. And all these factors can be used to predict how much energy that the grid can expect from a particular wind farm or a particular solar farm at any time of the day or night. Additionally, the grid can be designed to quickly back up wind and solar because their variations are going to be predictable. Some other features that contribute to 24/7 resilience are wind energy is produced at night. In fact, there's more wind energy at night than during the day. And so this is a real balancing factor to solar production, which we all know is limited to the daytime hours. Another factor is that if you have local or on-site renewables, like some of the recent solar farms that have come online in Colombia, these are actually even more resilient because they largely or completely bypass the grid by being connected into our local substations. And a lot of the failures in the grid occur not from power sources, but just because of transmission lines being brought down by extreme weather. Another thing Colombia can consider is implementing distributed microgrids, which means, for example, we might place solar farms in different parts of town. And this not only increases the resilience, but it minimizes the need to build new local transmission lines. Storage is another option. On the capacity slide, I mentioned using battery storage in the future. And battery storage costs are coming down significantly. There's a great deal of research into battery storage, as well as a lot of other types of storage options. And so this is something that, as we move into the next decade, is going to be increasingly available to help manage short-term variations. And finally, a lot of new investment is going to be made in clean energy transmission and the electrical grid over the next 10 years. The bipartisan infrastructure deal that Congress passed and the president signed is going to make $65 billion available to help communities across the country make this transition. So Colombia has existing coal contracts. So what are we going to do about those? Unfortunately, we have 3 of these coal contracts, and additionally, unfortunately, the City Council signed the contracts for the life of the plant. What this means is that, as long as that plant is operational, then technically we still have that contractual relationship. The oldest plant is in Sikeston, Missouri, and based upon its age, it should be closing sometime in the near future. For the sake of this scenario, the consultant forecasted that plant would close by the end of 2030. Our other 2 plants are Iatan 2 in Missouri, owned by Evergy Corporation, and Prairie State in Illinois. Now, the good news is that both states have recently passed laws that may help drive early closure of these plants. Missouri passed what's called securitization, which allows our regulated utilities to refinance the debt that they acquired to originally build these coal plants. And this would help close these coal facilities early without taking a financial hit. So Evergy could apply this to I-10 too. In Illinois last year, they passed the Climate and Equitable Jobs Act, which will force the Prairie State coal plant to reduce emissions 45% no later than 2038 and to zero by 2045. So this definitely offers us some opportunities to potentially negotiate with these companies to close these coal plants early or to get out of our contracts. Additionally, the consultant forecasts that any unused energy from our existing coal contracts, while they remain open, that Columbia doesn't need because we're buying renewable energy instead, could be sold on the open market, and this would help Columbia not be faced with the minimum contractual cost. So if those coal plants remain open after 2030, what's the benefit of Columbia converting to this 100% renewable energy goal? Because potentially someone's still buying that power and there's still emissions associated with it. Well, first off, we have to keep in mind that most of Columbia's energy comes from the distributed power grid. Very little of it is locally sourced. We're getting it from wherever the grid is getting it from, but we have made contracts for a certain amount of power to flow into that grid. So the grid operators manage how the kilowatts flow around the grid, what we're getting at any point in time here locally when we turn on a light. So if Columbia buys more renewable energy to have available to the grid, then this makes a big difference in how much energy is available overall. So the grid operators choose the lowest cost energy to add to the grid every few minutes. So like every 5 minutes, they're looking at what's the least cost energy, and then they're going to choose that for dispatching. And so at this time, renewable energy is being sold to the grid for less than most fossil fuel-based energy. So when the grid operators are choosing what to dispatch, they're calling on the wind farm or the solar farm or the hydropower dam instead of the coal and natural gas plants. And so this means that over time, we would expect that more renewable energy would be used and those fossil fuel plants would be sitting on standby more frequently. They would still be there, but they might not be dispatching energy unless called upon to do so. So we think over time that this would not only lower the amount of this energy that's being picked up in the grid, but it would also put pressure on those companies that own these plants to close them. But Columbia still needs to pursue exiting the coal energy contracts and driving shutdown of these coal plants to the extent possible. So we need City Council to request a legal review of the contracts, and we need city staff to start working with other communities that are customers of these coal plants to talk about how we can force a shutdown early. Columbia cannot shut down the plants on our own. We would not be alone or even the first to be making this commitment. Sierra Club tracks the commitments that are being made by cities across the country, and there's already a lot of cities that have committed to 100% renewable energy in some time period. There's actually communities in the United States that have actually already achieved 100% renewable energy for their electricity. In addition to that map, which shows all of the cities in all the time periods, I put together a list of the cities that have committed to 100% by 2030. And you'll see that some of these cities are similar population size to Columbia. So this is not something that we'll be doing. We would not be the only ones. But how can you help? Well, one thing you can do is you can share a petition, or you can sign a petition to the City Council that's in with the city future. So if you could, it would be great. And my colleague is going to put the URLs for these things in the chat. You can also, as an organization, sign on to an endorsement letter, and we'll put those URLs into the chat as well. And this is basically for any organization. It can be anything from Girl Scouts to religious organizations to businesses, just to show local support to the City Council that we support this goal. You can contact your city council member and the mayor, and then we all need to work together to help be able to achieve this goal by being more energy efficient and reducing our own peak demand. And you can also choose to install solar on your own home or business to help us reach this goal. So next up, we are going to have panel comments and questions. So I am going to turn this over to my colleague, Mark Heim, who is director of Mid-Missouri Peaceworks, and he is going to make a few comments.
Thank you, Carolyn. And I will say I'm having a little bit of lag on the computer here. And I don't know if that's coming out in my, can you hear me okay?
Mark, your audio is breaking up.
Yeah, I think that it's a problem that I can't address right now. So I think we should just go on to Erica. As much as I would like to share my thoughts.
Maybe we could go on with Erica and you could try and sign off and sign back in again. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Erica now.
Thanks, Carolyn. And thank you all for having us here today. And so like Barbara mentioned, I work part-time for Mid-Missouri Peaceworks, and my background is far more versed in climate change science and sustainability tactics rather than policy and utilities. But of course, I echo the need and priority for policy and institutional change. So I went to school for sustainable living and fisheries conservation. And while working in this field and in environments around the world, I saw firsthand how we were interrupting the natural cycle of our planet. And there are only so many changes that we can make in our daily lives as individuals before we need to enact policy changes in our local government. And so I believe utilities are made intentionally hard to understand, but Carolyn does a really amazing job of bringing out the main points of what we need to do to make Columbia a leader in sustainability in the state of Missouri and in the country. And so as a young person, I'm not trying to sound alarmist when I say that I think about climate change every single day. For example, just this morning, I had a pretty bad night's sleep and I just wanted to hop in my car and drive to work. And I live less than 2 miles from where I work. But then I think about how I have this personal responsibility to my future, to the future of my loved ones, and to this planet to instead dress a bit warmer and ride my bike or walk to the bus stop instead. And again, as a young person, I'm trying to plan my life, which includes the places I want to commit to for a long time. And if climate change continues unaddressed, it's painting a grim future for people who live in places like the American Southwest, the Pacific Northwest, the South, and even places like Missouri with weather events, different increasing temperatures and lack of resources in the future. And so I hear the same concerns from young folks around me as well. And so this is a reality that I and people my age have to deal with. And by 2030, when we would like to have 100% renewable energy in Columbia, I will still be under the age of 35 years old. And so will most of my friends and loved ones. And young people just have so much to look forward to in our future, and a healthy, sustainable environment should be part of that. And there is a lot of hope. We have the opportunity here, like what Carolyn just presented on, to work as a collective, to learn about climate action and policies, to advocate and to work towards a more sustainable future. And that is what this initiative is when it comes down to it. We are no longer settling for empty promises or slow-going climate action. We're advocating for systemic climate action now. And so I really implore you to continue to learn more about our local climate policies like this one, and share this information with the people that you love and care about, and to vote for your dollar and for candidates who support this initiative and to be a part of change. So thank you again for having me here.
Okay, well, Mark isn't back yet, Barbara, so maybe we should go on with a question.
Oh, yeah, we do have questions. So thank you so much. That was so understandable and detailed and informative. And I've been paying attention, and it was just put in a really good, concise format and answered a lot of questions, but we do have more. One person says, could you talk a little bit more about renewables when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing?
Okay, so maybe they put that question in before we got to that slide, but the thing is that the sun is shining during the day somewhere, or the wind is blowing somewhere. So the way that you deal with this is by having different sources of energy, wind farms or solar farms scattered around, in our case, probably the Midwest, some local. We already have some in Iowa. We already have some in Kansas. We already have some in Missouri. And so even though the wind may not be blowing in Kansas, although it always does, there might be even more wind blowing in Iowa. And so you just make sure that you have diverse sources of available that are going to be experiencing perhaps different weather conditions at different times. And as I mentioned, when the sun sets, the wind energy actually picks up because there's actually more wind at night. If you've never lived in some of these places, you don't realize really how windy they can be. Looks like Mark is back, so maybe before we take the next question, we can try him again.
All right, I'll try. Is it working now? It's good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, few quick things. One is thank you to the library and to the league for hosting this. I really appreciate that. It's critical issues that we all need to be talking about. Secondly, I'm here representing Peaceworks, but I'm also here as a grandfather and a father. I have a son who's in his early 40s, and I have two grandsons who are in their very young years, like 7 and going on 10. So I'm concerned about the future. I'm concerned about what's going to be after I'm gone, after many of us who've been involved in climate issues for decades are no longer here. And it seems like we are facing a unique set of threats right now that need to be addressed. And the reason we need to go renewable is clear. It's cleaner, it's healthier, it's more cost effective, and it's sustainable. And those are things that have been the case for decades. We've known this, but it's more cost effective now than ever. And this is the time to act. The scientific community has made it clear that we need to do this now. I will say that one thing that comes up a lot is people concerned about the cost. But what they're really concerned about is the price. And there's a difference between cost and price. And what we really should be concerned about are costs, which include the internal costs, the costs that we actually pay as a price, plus all the cost externalities. Those externalities include health effects, they include environmental impacts, things like pipelines springing a leak, polluting the waters from offshore drilling, coal mines. All of these things are significant impacts that we don't pay for in the price of our electricity. And then the big one is climate change. And that dwarfs all the other concerns. And it is a situation that is, in human terms, pretty irreversible. In other words, if we don't do it now and deal with this effectively, feedback loops come into place and we end up with a radically altered climate with much more severe weather and severe weather events. And that won't be for a year or two or a decade or two, it'll be for centuries, many centuries. So it's really important that we get it straight that when we're talking about what this will cost, it isn't costing in its price nearly as much as the cost, including all the externalities of not doing what's the right thing. I want to wrap up really quickly here, but let me just say, Siemens, a very respected international engineering firm, says it is feasible to do this by 2030. And we say, let's do it. We've kicked this can down the road far too long, and we've caused too much climate change already, some of which is lagging, so that even if we stopped all emissions right now, it would get worse for decades. And this is something we don't have, we don't have the moral authority to do that to future generations. It's just wrong. And we ought to do the right thing now. In closing, let me just say that we can't make do with vague promises and best intentions. We have to make a plan. And that plan has to have mileposts, and we need to know how we get from here to there. And right now, if we set a 2030 target, and that's 8 years away, we ought to know where we're going to be in 2 years and 4 years and 6 years and 8 years, and make it really clear how we're going to do this, because the best intentions don't make the changes we need. It takes planning and it takes action. As Carolyn said earlier, it takes a few years to site and get approval and put in place a new solar farm or a new wind farm. We've got to do it now. And I'll go back to questions. Sorry for being technically out of it.
Great. Oh, we do have more questions and we do have some time. First, I wanted to ask, when do you expect that this will come up before city council and people will need to be engaged in that way?
I'll take that one. We're hoping to make a public comment in the public comment period at the beginning of the meeting at the next city council meeting, in which I think is February 21st. Then the city council is planning to have a work session at one of their pre-council meetings in March, where they're going to talk about the IERMP and the work plan. And so we'll be trying to talk individually with city council members before that. We don't have a date yet when an ordinance or a possible vote might come up before city council, but if people want to stay engaged, then certainly we'll be trying to keep people informed about what's going on and when it would be good to send letters of support. But the action that people can take today, of course, is to sign the petition or send their own contact, a letter of support or email to city council in support of this goal.
Great. Another question we have is, will these slides be available?
Yes, we can certainly make them available if that's something that you have the means to do on the League of Women Voters or the library's website.
Okay, so we'll look into that and that person can contact either of us about that. Another question is, what city incentives are there for residential solar and solar battery, and do you expect those to increase?
Right now, there are incentives from the city to, if you install solar in your on your home or your business, you can get rebates. And there's also, I believe this year, still tax incentives from the federal government. We don't have a local one for battery storage yet, but certainly they're available for solar. I personally have used those. We have a 4 kilowatt system on our home, and it was a very smooth process, and I got my rebate check very quickly from the city. And you can get more information about that from the website, which is Columbia Power Partners. If you just search on Columbia Power Partners, you can get more information on the solar programs. And there are also opportunities through Boon Electric for anyone who's in their district.
Okay, and that leads to another question. Are there any plans to approach Boon Electric about renewable energy goal?
Yes, I know that Sierra Club and Renew Missouri have both worked with Boon Electric in the past to talk with them about increasing their renewable energy mix. Boon Electric actually has a what they call a community solar farm available to their customers, which means that even if you can't put solar on your house, you can subscribe to, or your apartment, whatever, you can subscribe to getting some of your electricity from renewable energy through Boon Electric. So Boon Electric is taking some steps. Obviously, you know, as a climate advocate or change advocate, I would like to see, you know, them moving more quickly. One of the things that I think there's going to be some opportunities for is if Columbia makes this commitment, then that's going to mean that the people that build solar farms are going to be looking more at our county for building renewable energy, and that will also, you know, help Boon Electric.
Great, thank you. Another question is, what concerns, if any, are there with this goal in regard to the condition of the city's power plant?
So a city power plant, just for one thing, it no longer burns coal, which everybody, it does still use natural gas. And part of the analysis that was done that Siemens did was to look at whether or not we should make any maintenance or enhancements to those natural gas turbines at the power plant. And their recommendation was not to. So other than that, I really don't know more about how the status of the power plant factored into it. We also have a separate facility called the Columbia Energy Center, and that was the one that the consultant did recommend keeping as a backup during this transformation period.
And there was a longer question. I think I can condense it into, it's related to energy efficiency. Can you talk a little bit about how energy efficiency will play into this goal? And they also mentioned like people having their heat on high in the winter with big houses versus people with little houses. Just talking about the energy efficiency aspect of it.
I could address that a little bit. Basically, when people hear the word energy efficiency, they sometimes confuse that and think it's doing without. And efficiency is really doing better with what you are using. So in other words, if I get more insulation in my attic and in my walls, and my house is tightened up and weatherized fully, I will use a lot less energy to keep at the same level of temperature in my house. So we have multiple opportunities through changing appliances, through making our homes more energy efficient, to essentially change how much energy we need. And the more we can bring down the amount of energy that we consume, the easier it is to make the transition. And for that reason, we would encourage investments in efficiency, and those efficiency investments are almost always cheaper than producing the power. It's cheaper to avoid needing power than it is to consume power. So it's a win-win. You win environmentally in terms of the climate, you also win in terms of your pocketbook. And that's why the city offers several different incentive programs to make your appliances in your home more efficient.
Oh, thank you. I would just add, I've been a great user of hanging up clothes, laundry, both outside in the summer and inside in the winters. Another example of how you can just save energy by not using it. And I would mention that I did that when I was working full-time at the public defender's office and on the city council. I know judges who are hanging out their laundry people. It's really a mental health issue. I think it's great to be outside. So
It
just
is.
a little plug for hanging out your laundry inside and out. Then I'll go to another question. Let's see. Can you talk about the political barriers that seem to be the most insurmountable?
Well, one of the reasons that we're holding this webinar today is to help educate everyone about the issues, realistically and honestly, what are the issues? Because in order for the city council to make this decision, they have to have community support. So, Columbia in general, when we originally wrote the climate action plan, we did some surveys and some community analysis, and over 80% of the community supported Columbia taking climate action and moving to renewable energy. As Barbara Hoppe originally said, the renewable energy ordinance passed back in 2004 with a vote of the community. So I think in Columbia, we have the community support to make this transition, but it's something that we will need to be vocal about with our city council members so that they know that that support exists.
Can I add one point to that too? Basically, we are very privileged here in Columbia to have a municipal utility that's governed by our city council. And that means that we have the political ability to move an issue like this forward. If we were in a community that was served by an investor-owned utility like Ameren, we would have no leverage as a community. And the State Public Service Commission would, along with Ameren's board, make decisions as to what they would or wouldn't do. And very indirectly, if we could elect a pro climate action majority in both houses of Missouri's legislature, we could pass laws, but that is a big leap to get from here to there. Whereas getting the city council in Columbia, people we know and live here in our community and who are dependent on us to vote for them, that's a situation in which we have leverage and we ought to use it.
Thank you. Let's see, we have another comment question. We need some tiers on large general service and industrial customers. They pay as little as 4 cents per kilowatt with minimal conservation efficiency incentives. Is there anything you want to say about that, or anything involved in the plan to address that?
Well, I can comment that there is a cost of service study being done for the electric utility, which is something that's done on a regular basis to ensure that there's a good understanding of the costs. As Mark said, we own our own utility, so we need to understand those costs and then also have that information to set rates. And so that cost of service study will help shed some light on some of those factors. And then historically, for some reason, I know industrial customers have had lower rates. I assume that's because people favored, bringing businesses into town for economic development. So that is something that, potentially would need to be looked at. I saw there was another comment related to potentially having yet a fourth tier of electric rates, so that, the people that use the most are paying the most. And those things are all great for helping control demand and, helping people realize that they're using a lot of energy as they keep bumping up through the tiers. Another thing that is happening is the city, the utility is looking at what we talked about earlier, their demand side programs, all these incentives and rebates, and both commercial and residential, because you have to look at those from time to time to make sure they're keeping pace with technology. The programs maybe are 10 years old, so they might need to be revisited. One thing the Climate Commission has encouraged the utility to do is look at those programs and make sure that they're really serving the needs of lower income households in town, and that those households can actually participate in those programs, and they're not just for the customers who are well off enough to be able to, buy solar, for example. So both of those kind of analysis are going on. And I would definitely think that, part of, making this transition is we need to be looking at all aspects of our utility to make sure that, we're supporting, not just converting our existing power usage to clean energy, like Mark said, that we're looking at ways to reduce it and drive that demand down. And there's other demand side programs that are available, particularly for commercial customers, that I've heard about that Columbia is not using. So we have more that we could do about that, where businesses choose to throttle down their usage, like during peak hours, which in our case is 4 to 6 p.m. in the summer. And you give them a discount if they do that, if they cut down their usage. So there's a lot more that could be done. And those are things that, certainly we would hope the utility would look at going forward.
I have two really good questions. The first one is regarding Columbia has a lot of rental property, and it seems there aren't incentives, or are there incentives for landlords to make housing more energy efficient?
Right. So this is an area that I've personally been working on a lot through the Climate and Environment Commission, is rental energy efficiency. And today, all of the programs available to residential property owners, landlords can participate in. So if they want to install a more efficient HVAC system in one of their rental properties, they can do that and get the same rebates as if it was in the home they were living in themselves. So that's great, because I lived in a community where that wasn't true. But there is what we call a split incentive with a lot of properties where the landlord would be making the investment, but the tenant would be the one that would get the benefit of the lower utility bill. And so one of the things that the Climate Commission is working on, and we hope to bring forward to the council in the next 2 months, is recommendations on how to improve rental energy efficiency in Columbia. So that's something I would say stay tuned on. I think it's really important that we do that simultaneously over the next decade, along with the rest of this transition. And it might involve new programs potentially for landlords. I will mention, though, for anyone who does fall in, what the government calls a low-income household, that there are programs today through Central Missouri Community Action, where if you qualify, you can get your home weatherized at no cost to you or the landlord. So if you know people that might fall in that category, I would encourage them to contact Central Missouri Community Action.
Wow, that's great. Let's see, there was another good question. I've been informed of a bill that has been introduced to incentivize community solar? Can anyone inform us on that?
No, I can't.
I guess
Something I'll
not.
look up, but I haven't seen it.
Yeah, that was from Adrian Plank.
Okay,
So,
I
just
know.
as a
Adrian.
reference.
I can follow up with him.
Let's see. Here's Project Sunroof. Let's see. Oh, that was just, you can zoom in on your house to see how much potential for solar it has. Someone mentioned that. And what is the situation for batteries at home? If people are interested in not hooking into the city utility, is that possible, or is that coming up in the future, especially with like the weather events? People are more interested in being sort of independent, not having a generator, but something more environmental.
Can I speak to that, Barbara? There are two ways you can go with batteries. One way is the off the grid idea, that you have your own little system, you charge your batteries using your solar panels, and you use that electricity and you're not connected. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me in a community where we already have the wires going down every street in the city. The other option is a grid intertie, where you essentially are able to hook your solar panels into the system and draw power from the grid when you need it and put extra energy into the grid when you don't. But you can throw into that a third option, which is to add battery storage at your home. And when you're generating more electricity than you need, use that to charge your battery. And if your battery reaches full capacity and you're still generating extra electricity, put it out into the grid. And that to me seems like a good way to go ultimately. Cost of battery storage is coming down, and hopefully over the next few years, it will be much more competitive than it is right now. I know Elon Musk is working with Tesla to not just produce cars that are electric, but also these solar, not solar, but these renewably generated electric storage systems in people's homes. I'll throw in one more thing, which is if you have an electric vehicle that can be parked during the day where it's charging off of incoming solar, the fully charged batteries can then be used as a way to draw energy out into your home at night. And that's another system that's coming down the pike in the next few years.
Right. And I'll just add that Tesla does have, and probably some other companies now too, do have residential battery options. They still cost about $10,000. So I personally haven't invested in them yet, but they are available. And, you know, if that's something I really want to do, but we use the net metering approach that Mark was talking about. And that means that during the summer, I build up a credit with the utility because we have so much sunshine in the summer. And then during these winter months where it can be gloomy, we use our energy credit with the utility, and that covers our electric bill.
Thank you so much. I think that comes to the end of our program. Thank you so much, Carolyn Amperin, Mark Hyam, and Erica Ascani for sharing your wealth of information and knowledge with us. Remind people to try to sign on to the letters to the council, and you can get that in the chat. And I think you can go to, we'll have it on the Columbia website too for people to see, and it's probably at the Sierra Club site too, I imagine. And I also wanted to let people know that next month our guest speaker will be the city manager, DeCarlin Seawood, and that will be February 8th, noon on Zoom. So please join us then and take action to make our community and world better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.